I am old, so I have some old people stuff. My lower back hurts sometimes, I don't like to stand around, but I feel okay. Maybe you should make that your headline. George R.R. Martin is not dying. Happy 2026, everyone! Welcome or welcome back to the Company of the Cat. Hi, I am George Martin's official handholder, and I'm very late to the party as always. I was planning to make a totally different video, but George kicked off the year with a bang. He did an interview with a Hollywood reporter, and considering half the internet's reaction when it came out, I was personally expecting more. Ρε, δεν είπε τίποτα. Και βγάζει νόημα ότι δεν είπε τίποτα, είναι λογικό. I'm not gonna lie though, I was pleasantly surprised by how unhinged George was. He sounded happy, relaxed, way more laid back and relieved than in other interviews. He spoke very comfortably about things he'd been saying for years, just without dancing around them this time. Since that's not really his usual style, George generally avoids being confrontational. He also directly addressed his writing issues, and to an extent the fandom's responses, but most of what he said before. Repeatedly. For years. And that's why the reactions at this point in the year of our Lord 2026 genuinely confuse me. This has been a pattern with his interviews since 2014-15. Every George interview cycle is basically the same. He says the same things, just phrased a little differently or with a different tone, and everyone loses their mind. 5 days pass, everyone forgets, and we go right back complaining and arguing about the exact same things. Then the next interview, blog post, fan signing, or offhand comment rolls around, and people are up in arms all over again. And that's exactly what happened this time, 2 days of chaos, and then it's like he never addressed any of it at all. At some point, George's interviews stopped being about what he's actually saying, or what it means for the books and the world of Ice and Fire, and became about what the reactions say about the fandom itself. The Worldcon panel was taking audience questions when somebody asked Martin if he would let another writer finish the Winds of Winter because you're not going to be around for much longer. The audience booed. Martin felt like he had been slapped. When he looked online to see the reaction, he was dismayed to find some fans saying he deserved it. They say he lied to us, he's going to die soon, look how old he is. Even now, months later, the author looks rattled. I really didn't need that shit, he says. Nobody needs that shit. First of all, I get wanting the books. I want them, you want them, even people who haven't read them somehow want them. And honestly, I'd bet a lot of the most entitled comments come from people who haven't actually read the books at all, and I would die on that hill. But we are not owed these books. It's disappointing, sure, but we chose to emotionally invest in an unfinished series. That was our choice. Plenty of people refuse to start A Song of Ice and Fire because it isn't finished. We could have done that, we didn't. We paid for the books that already exist, we spent our time with them, and that's it. We haven't paid for the Winds of Winter or A Dream of Spring. And we're not entitled to them just because we have been here for a long time. George Martin didn't put a gun to our heads and forced us to care this much. It's okay to be sad, it's okay to be annoyed, it's okay to lose interest and walk away. What's not okay is being an entitled asshole towards the author, or actively trying to ruin the experience for people who still enjoy engaging with the series. That says a lot more about you than it does about George. These comments don't push him to finish the books, they're not tough love, and it is not our place to play that role anyway. The only thing they actually achieve is proving that a lot of people are assholes. And it's very obvious that this stuff affects him, like it would affect anyone. Considering the kind of things people say to George, I am pretty sure some of them actually enjoy the fact that it affects him. Some fans are angry at Martin for wasting their time, or lying to them, yet somehow find endless free time to comment on George's posts, fan posts, or watch videos just to say things like, you're dumb, the books will never come out, he will die soon, and I'm smarter than you. To people who do that, you're not as clever as you think. Some of us actually having fun. I am fully Delulu, and I love it. I genuinely believe we'll get the book someday, and people are going to crush our heart. But even if we don't, I'm perfectly happy discussing the books we already have. It's insane to spend years blaming Martin for wasting your time, while continuing to waste your own time engaging with something you clearly don't enjoy anymore. Get off your high horse, touch grass, do something you actually like. It will be better for you, for the rest of the fandom, and probably for Martin too. As for the idea that George is intentionally lying just to keep fans around, I don't buy that. What did happen, especially up until around 2018-19, is that he was widely overconfident about how quickly the book would come out and made promises he couldn't keep. That's a fair criticism, but he doesn't do that anymore. And I am writing. Winter is coming, I told you long ago, and so it is. The Winds of Winter is very late, I know, but it will be done, I won't say when. I've tried that before, only to burn you all and jinx myself. But I will finish it, and then will come a dream of spring. George has writer's block, plain and simple. Writer's block, fatigue, burnout, this is the first time he said it this clearly, instead of just hinting at it. Since at least the quarantine, whenever a date for Winds comes up, it's either him very obviously joking, people playing broken telephone, or so-called insiders whose information should always be taken with a massive grain of salt. And then people turn around and say, see, George said again that next year we will have Winds, and use that to justify some genuinely vile behavior, calling him a liar, wishing death on him so someone else could finish the books, something that isn't going to happen, and I am glad. Saying he deserves it because he's lying to us. As someone who writes, not just for this channel, but academically as well, I cannot stress this enough, writing is fucking hard, especially when there's expectation. One day you feel great about what you've written, you think, yeah, I'm on track, I can finish this, and the next day you reread it and feel like absolute shit about both your work and yourself. That's exactly what Martin described in this interview. I will open the last chapter I was working on and I'll say, oh fuck, this is not very good. And I'll go in and I'll rewrite it. Or I'll decide this Tyrion chapter is not coming alone, let me write a Jon Snow chapter. If I'm not interrupted though, what happens, at least in the past, is sooner or later I do get into it. He also brought up Herbert in this interview. He didn't like Dune anymore, and he didn't want to write any more Dune books, Martin says, but he felt locked in by the success of Dune, so he kept writing them. Martin finishes and waits. Do you relate to how Herbert felt? I am not necessarily tired of the world of Ice and Fire, he says. I love the world and the world building, but yes I do. I do the exact same things with my videos, so I cannot blame him on that. I will feel great about a script, say a video is coming tomorrow, and then it doesn't go up. Because when the time comes, I don't like it anymore, or I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it. Now imagine that process on a scale we genuinely can't comprehend. Every time Martin feels good enough to say anything about his progress, people jump up his throat, so what's even the point of giving updates anymore? Locking him in a room won't fix it, he literally tried that. When the pandemic hit, Martin tried going to a literal cabin in the woods to finish winter. That was a prolific stretch, he says, resulting in many new chapters, but it took him away from his longtime partner, Paris McBride. And even Martin's forced isolation effort ran into creative troubles. Inspiration doesn't descend from the heavens just because he cancels other projects. And I don't believe George is tired of this world or doesn't want to finish the books. He says the opposite, many times. What he does have is burnout. For years he tried to push through it. Without being fully honest about it, he made vague comments about writing getting harder, but never outright admitted how bad it was. That's how we ended up with overly optimistic statements about the book being almost done. I have to finish the next book, Martin fretted. The actual writing is getting harder. I am rewriting. I am struggling. Maybe I am over-optimistic about how quickly I can write these things. I'm trying to cut back on anything that I can to clear my decks and get this done. So yes, years ago, he made promises he shouldn't have and couldn't keep. That criticism is fair, but he doesn't do that anymore. This is his story, like it or not, he has the right to finish it whenever he wants, if he wants, and however he wants, even if that sucks for us. Art is not a democracy, we are not owed an ending. If someone isn't okay with that anymore, they're free to disengage. Stop following him, stop caring, stop giving him attention and money, that's a valid choice. What they can do is demand things from him as if he's obliged to deliver on the schedule, while being shitheads. For now, this is the reality. George has writer's block, and we need to come to terms with that, instead of pretending he's stringing fans along or doesn't care about wins. I'm not going to sit here and pretend George has handled everything perfectly, because he hasn't, in my opinion. As he himself has said about Game of Thrones, I don't think it was very good for me. The very thing that should have speeded me up actually slowed me down. And honestly, I think this applies to the TV adaptations in general. But as stated before, even in the cabin, in the end he did have some issues. I can't and I won't declare whether he's right or wrong for wanting a legacy for his work across different mediums. Personally, I don't think studios care about fantasy or adaptations or themes. What they care about is established hype, built-in fandoms, and guaranteed attention. Most writers, showrunners, studios, and directors don't want the story, they want the audience that comes with a popular IP. George, on the other hand, wants to see his story translated correctly into a visual medium. He's clearly invested in that, and I'm not going to blame him for trying. And as I said earlier, him doing other projects isn't entirely, really, what's stopping him from finishing Winds. Do I think it will work the way he hopes? Honestly, no. But I do hope it does. I would genuinely love to finally get a good Song of Ice and Fire story on screen. That said, even with something as promising as Dunk and Egg, I'm holding a very small basket που λένε και στο χωριό μου. Where I will blame Martin is in how vague and non-confrontational he's been over the years when criticizing the showrunners and the studios, and occasionally the fandom, because this isn't new behavior. For years, he described the adaptation issues in more careful diplomatic language even when he is clearly frustrated. It can be traumatic, he told Fast Company, because sometimes their creative vision and your creative vision don't match, and you get the famous creative differences thing. That leads to a lot of conflict. He also said that the show's divisive final series was not completely faithful to what he had mapped out, joking, otherwise it would have to run another 5 seasons. You get totally extraneous things like the studio or the network weighing in, and they have some particular things that has nothing to do with the story, but relates to, well, this character is popular, so let's give him a lot of more stuff to do. After the series finale, George had stated, by season 5 and 6, and certainly 7 and 8, I was pretty much out of the loop, he revealed. Asked why he became estranged from the show, he simply replied, I don't know, you have to ask Dan and David. Now, with his latest interview in mind, compare all this to this exchange. I asked Martin carefully, I know you can say much about this, but I was wondering how your relationship with Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal got so rocky. It's worse than rocky, Martin says, looking miserable. It's abysmal. Same message, same issues, but this time said very clearly and way more bluntly. And I wish he'd been this clear years ago. I would love the 6-part blog post about House of the Dragon where he laid out exactly how his story was mishandled. I would love the digs at D&D to be stated plainly without room for interpretation, just to end this conversation once and for all. At this point, it's obvious that Martin placed a lot of faith in past showrunners and got beaten in the ass twice. He's explained many times how both shows disrespected his work, just never as bluntly as he probably should have, and him returning to HBO for yet another show doesn't exactly help his case. The result is people running circles around his statements, twisting them and arguing endlessly. And that's a big reason this interview got the reaction it did, I believe, despite him once again not actually saying much that was new. This time it was much more harder to misinterpret what he meant, and it's also one of the rare times he throws digs at the fandom itself. That said, I do blame George when it comes to the House of the Dragon specifically. A lot of the changes that later blew up in Season 2 started in Season 1 when he was far more involved. He should have kept a much shorter leash, he didn't, he was too lenient and that part is on him. I don't know whether that was naivety, compromise, money or some mix of all three, but he did play a role in how things turned out. Many of the problems that later exploded were already there while he was still more hands-on. And if Dunk and Egg ends up going to hell, I'll say it again, part of that responsibility will fall on Martin himself. That's not something I say about Game of Thrones though. That was his first major deal, he didn't yet know how to handle studios, showrunners, or that level of adaptation pressure. At this point though, he doesn't really have that excuse anymore. Both times George gave far too much freedom to studios and showrunners, and the truth, sad as it is that studios, most showrunners, and a large portion of viewers don't actually care about his story. They care about a good entertaining TV show, that's it. While we care deeply about George's and our showrunners' perspectives, we ultimately make decisions that make the best show. And it makes sense. Most viewers are just viewers. They don't care about George's themes, his intent, or his long-term narrative. And again, as sad as that is, for him and for some book readers, it is reality. More people watch shows than read books. That's just the nature of the medium. More people watch it than read it. But for better or worse, we are all still in the same fandom, arguing about completely different stories. And this is just my read on it. But I think a big reason a portion of this combined fandom is so hostile and entitled towards George is because many people genuinely loved the shows and were deeply invested in them. In the case of Game of Thrones, they never got real closure, and I'm not even talking about a good ending. The ending was whack, it didn't make sense. The long night was a mess, characters were dumb, plot holes everywhere, and the last seasons were a train wreck for basically every reason imaginable. With House of the Dragon, George pushed back much earlier. But when George Martin comes out and says, yeah, this shouldn't have been done that way, it feels like a personal attack to people who are emotionally attached to the shows and like these changes. From what I've seen, a lot of the most extreme and entitled fans are or were huge fans of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, sometimes exclusively. Not all show fans, obviously, but there is a noticeable overlap. To the point where I've seen people argue that HBO improved his story, especially with House of the Dragon. And to that I have to say, no. House of the Dragon did not improve Fire and Blood, and I'm not even the biggest fan of Fire and Blood as a book. Just like D&D, Condell changed the story. He didn't improve it. And before anyone loses their mind, I'm not saying people who haven't read the books are uncultured swine, or that liking the shows more than the books means you lack taste, neither did George by the way. In my opinion, the shows are poor adaptations, and often not great standalone stories either, even though entertaining sometimes. But if you like them, good for you, and like me, you have more shows to watch. Whether those changes are improvements is completely subjective. As George Martin himself has said, no doubt once I'm done, there will be huge debate which version of the story is better. Some people will like my books, others will prefer the television show. And that's fine, you pays your money and you makes your choice. What George is pushing back against, and what many fans, myself included, are completely valid in saying is that a lot of these people build their careers and reputation as great storytellers on the back of his work. That is just a fact. They didn't sit down and craft a story from scratch. In both cases, they took an incredibly dense story, changed it, and didn't care much for the source material or its themes. And we know they didn't. George has said as much. In this interview, he talked about how dismissive Condell was of his concerns. That frustration is what led to the now infamous deleted blog post about House of the Dragon Season 2, and D&D were no better. When I asked Benioff and Weiss if it was possible to infer any overall intentionality to the upcoming 10 episodes, they sneered. Themes are for 8th grade book reports, Benioff told me. And in another interview back in 2019, Benioff and Weiss still weren't sure why George Martin entrusted them with his magnum opus, as the two didn't have any comparable experience or even an appreciation of the book's themes. George is absolutely allowed to be salty, frustrated, and snarky about this, because at the end of the day, this is his story and it's obvious people do not really respect it even though they make their bank from it. Now, about fans preferring one version over another, people can like whatever they like. I, for one, am not the ASOIAF police. That's not the issue. The issue is that in this fandom specifically, conversations constantly happen between people who have only ever engaged with one of the two mediums, while everyone pretends we are talking about the same story. We are not. House of the Dragon is not canon. Game of Thrones wasn't canon either. Yes, the shows include some elements that exist in the books, or may appear later, but the shows themselves are not canon. George has been very clear about this for over a decade. Only the books are canon. If you're a House of the Dragon fan, that's completely fine. Analyze it, theorize about it, enjoy it with other show fans, compare it to the books if you want. There is nothing wrong with that. What doesn't make sense is projecting the show's version of events, beyond a few confirmed plot points, onto the books. These are not the same stories, the events aren't the same, the characters often aren't the same beyond sharing names. Even when similar things happen in both mediums, the story of its core is often barely the same. In House of the Dragon specifically, the creators leaned heavily on the fact that Fire and Blood is written as a historical account, and then ran wild with it, to the point where George himself had to step in and say, no, this isn't it. Condell framed this as filling the gaps, but that's not what's happening. They're not writing through history, they're telling their own story based on George's, and that would be fine if they were honest about it. I get why show fans project the shows onto the books to some extent. They care about the characters they watched for years, the story they followed, and the version of events they're familiar with and were first introduced to. Because at this point, many fans, if not most, have been introduced to A Song of Ice and Fire via a show. Many don't care about the 1,000 themes and details that never made it into the TV shows, and honestly, they shouldn't have to. The shows should have been strong enough to stand on their own. Adaptations need to work as standalone stories. Viewers shouldn't be required to read the books or watch a dozen YouTube videos just to understand what they just watched. If that's the approach, then you're simply not writing a good adaptation. A good adaptation should invite people to explore the source material, not force them to. And I genuinely think the A Song of Ice and Fire adaptations are some of the biggest offenders when it comes to this. They're interesting enough to get people hooked, because George Martin writes incredibly strong settings, but they do a very poor job of providing sufficient background and world building on their own. So people are pushed to migrate to the books for context, and they get stuck. But the thing is, a large portion of those viewers were never actually interested in engaging with the books in the first place. The shows didn't make them want to read the story. They're not there because they care about the story as George wrote it. They're there because they're trying to figure out what the hell is going on in the shows, context and background-wise, or pick up clues about the shows. That's why so many of the engagement ends up being second-hand. Wiki pages, fan videos, summaries, and lore explainers. It's kind of an open secret in the fandom that there are a pretty sizable group of book fans by association, rather than people who have actually read the books. And this is not a dig, by the way, I can see how this is fun. But this is where a lot of fandom discourse breaks out. Because when people take their preference for the show and project it back onto the books, to analyze them, build theories, or argue canon, I genuinely have to ask, what even is the point? And then book fans get angry. I've been there too. It's incredibly difficult to have book-only discussions without the shows constantly creeping in, because the adaptations are now deeply ingrained in the fandom's collective brain. I'd argue that a solid 80-85% of the most unhinged fandom arguments exist because we're debating different stories, different characters, and different themes, while pretending they're the same. That happened with Game of Thrones, and it's happening again with House of the Dragon and FireAndBlood. The success of Thrones was both the best thing that could have happened to Martin and the worst thing that could have happened to the greatest story he ever wrote. And yeah, pretty much. Even though the interview focused mostly on his writing process, the fandom to some extent, House of the Dragon and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, George himself circled back unprompted to the end of Game of Thrones. Martin's thoughts turn unprompted to the end of Ice and Fire. It becomes clear that the details of his story's conclusion, like so much of the saga, remains uncertain. I was going to kill more people, he muses, not the ones they killed in the show. They made it more of a happy ending. I don't see a happy ending for Tyrion. His whole arc has been tragic from the first. I was going to have Sansa die, but she's been so appealing in the show, maybe I'll let her live. After laying out how studios and showrunners sat him out and dismissed his input on the very stories they are adapting, his thoughts drift back to A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones, and it becomes very clear that the end of his story is very much not the same. To the people who still think Martin is writing the same story as D&D, or that he hasn't finished the books because he's afraid of the backlash from the show's ending, cope. I don't know what else to say. It is clear that he has a complicated and arguably unresolved relationship with the television series. On the one hand, it completely changed my life, yet as he says, they're not the same thing, although they are very closely related to each other. When asked whether the show's ending, which received mixed responses from both critics and fans, affects his own, he is clear. No, it doesn't. It doesn't change anything at all. As Rick Nelson says in Garden Party, one of my favorite songs, you can't please everybody, so you've got to please yourself. For over a decade now, since Game of Thrones was still airing, he has said the same things in every possible way, and people still analyze his books through the lens of a TV series that frankly didn't give a shit about his story. And all that really shows is how little many people care about what George is actually trying to say with it. What and why he is writing in the first place. The first blog post he made after the show ended was titled An Ending, not The Ending. And he spelled it out very clearly. Book or show, which will be the real ending? It's a silly question. Because it is. Due to the medium, the removals, the changes, and the loss of entire characters and themes, It is impossible for A Song of Ice and Fire to end the same way as Game of Thrones, even if some isolated elements overlap. He said this repeatedly, most explicitly in 2022 when he wrote, "What I have noticed more and more of late is my gardening is taking me further and further away from the television series. Some things will be the same, a lot will not." It's completely fine to care for and prefer one version over the other. What isn't fine or useful is projecting the show's version of events onto the books in order to analyze them or argue canon. It's not fair to George or the books as a standalone project, because they are the standalone project. It's also just as annoying as book fans barging into show-only spaces with, well, actually in the books, these are not the same story, they haven't been for a very long time. Stories aren't just a checklist of plot points, George isn't writing a Wikipedia summary. He's trying to say something, themes matters, intent matters. Don't listen to D&D. A lot of the discourse around Winds make it feel like a significant portion of the fandom doesn't actually care about the story anymore. They just want any ending that makes more sense and isn't sloppy. We're arguing endlessly about a story that for many people they don't even seem that invested in beyond obsessively wanting closure. And that's largely because Game of Thrones never gave them one. If the show's ending had been even halfway decent, I genuinely think a lot of people wouldn't still be obsessed with books they haven't read, or wouldn't read them just to see what really happens. They don't care about the full story, they want George to come out and say, here's the ending, that's it, and that's sad. And George knows it too. I do fear that a certain portion of fans are so angry about how long Winds has taken me, that they are prepared to hate the book unread. And I don't think that anger is just about how long the book is taking. A lot of people enter this universe through the shows, especially Game of Thrones, myself included, by the way. That show collapsed under its own weight and never made sense of itself by the end. What they want from Winds and Dream isn't George's story as much as an ending they can project back onto the show and fill the unlimited questions the show has left them with. They want closure for the story they were invested in. And that's why a sizable portion of the fandom is stuck on the idea that despite all the changes, removals and differences, the books have to end up close to the show's events. Because if they don't, then the ending they'll get won't make sense for the version of the story they actually care about. And because Winds isn't out, that frustration gets redirected at George for being late, for working on other projects, for not revealing the ending, for not finishing the books before the show aired, and for somehow being responsible for how badly the show ended. As if Game of Thrones was flawless when it was adapting A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, and the only thing that went wrong was that they ran out of source material. People are angry for 1,000 different reasons. Book fans are angry at the show and at show fans, and even some book fans who constantly talk about the novels through the lens of the show, while often caring very little about the original story or where it's actually going, because if they did, why keep projecting the show into the books? Show fans and readers who only picked up the books because the shows were never very good at telling a cohesive story from start to finish, are angry at book fans for trashing a story they liked and were invested in, they're angry at D&D for ruining it, and everyone across the board is angry at George Martin for not finishing Winds. And in the middle of all this is George Martin with writer's block. I made this video mainly because I needed to vent. Some people will agree, some won't, and that's fine. In the 13 years I've been an ASOIAF fan, this is simply what I've observed. Every new interview feels like déjà vu at this point. I'd like to believe that this interview will finally put an end to some of these reactions, especially the gross comments about George's health and age. You're mad, fine, be mad, just don't be an ass. But if I'm being honest, I seriously doubt anything will change. We'll find out in the next update. Happy New Year again and see you in the next video.